the question of the museum's relationship to Afghanistan has to be seen in a wider context. From the museum's start in 1936, it was already an international museum. It had Belgian artists in a Dutch collection. And through the whole history of the museum, there's always been an internationalist vision. In other words, that art is not restricted to the borders of a particular country. Now, clearly, the history of the last 20 years is the history of globalization in a certain condition, economic globalization, but also cultural globalization. We are clearly now much more connected to each other in terms of the information that we get, in terms of media, in terms of our cultural knowledge of each other, than we were even 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. So that idea of the international, when in 1936 the international was maybe Belgium and perhaps Luxembourg as the extent of international relations, is now in many ways the whole world, or at least large parts of it. And so for the Van Abbe Museum, that change in the idea of the international is something that's been very important to follow. Within that context, it makes sense to choose particular situations or particular places where there is an existing relationship, where there is, in a sense, some reason why we, from this place, will connect to another place beyond this global concern that we all share. And in that sense, particularly the Middle East, with the political, economic importance not only of oil but also of war, which define in some ways the Dutch relationship or the Western European relationship with those parts of the world, and the absolute significance that has had over the last 20 years for our societies here, from questions of immigration through to questions of military engagement, through to questions of the survival of the planet, climate change, use of resources and things like this. That seems to be a particularly rich area to explore. And that's a decision that we made some time ago, and so we've been working in the broad terms of the Middle East for around 4 or 5 years. And that's produced exhibitions by artists from the Middle East. It's produced curatorial residencies from people from the Middle East. And it's produced works in the collection from the Middle East. So various very obvious sort of pathways that have come out of that research into that particular area. Afghanistan comes on board, of course, because instantly you think about the immediate history of Dutch military involvement in that country, but also because have been a number of asylum seekers, people leaving Afghanistan under emergency conditions and arriving in the Netherlands. So there is an Afghani community here in the Netherlands. And one member of that community is part of our team in the museum. So therefore the relationship to Afghanistan developed on the one hand through this strategic connection with the world and then with the Middle East within the world, and on the other hand through our very organic relationship with Afghanistan through Shafiq Omar. So that I think is the fundamental reason why we started to think, Afghanistan could be an interesting topic to explore. And then the question is, what kind of exchange, what kind of process would make sense? And I think that question is still one that we need to answer. It's not something which needs to already be closed. There are what is clearly important is for us as an organization to put our prejudices and prejudgments of what is necessary in a land like Afghanistan to one side, and to genuinely ask questions about what would make sense for our knowledge to be shared with the people in Afghanistan, and what would make sense of their knowledge to be shared with us. And I think that's a question which we're still in the process of answering, and we shouldn't really answer that before we have a much broader understanding of what the possibilities might be and what would make sense for those people and also for us. I mean, maybe one of the most interesting parts of this project for me, but also other projects, is really the way that we can as a museum, how can we as a museum operate in the world that makes sense? There's a kind of given pattern for how a museum should operate, which is basically through the gallery system, through the market system, and through the press system. And that success is measured in terms of those very, very known measures. But there are other ways of operating, and in a sense our public subsidy, our support from the state gives us the opportunity to operate in other ways, because we're not dependent on making a profit. That's a huge luxury, and we should take advantage of that huge luxury, I think, for as long as we have it. It might not last for so long. So while that lasts, let's take advantage of it by trying to do things that are against the flow, perhaps, or that try to reveal different sides of issues like Afghanistan, which are very present in the media. And I think what's interesting about that is that I think for us as an institution, but also hopefully for that public that follows us, there's a huge amount of discovery that can happen. That it's no longer about asserting your own beliefs through going to a museum and having them confirmed. Yeah? So I believe in modernism, and I go to the museum in order to tell me that modernism is very good. Yeah? But actually it's about this idea of discovering another angle, another picture, another way of looking at the world, a way of reading the world, if you like, that isn't the way of reading the world that we're given through the mass media or through education. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge. And the Afghanistan from project for me is very much part of that process of reading or maybe rereading the world against the text, the palimpsest that we receive from the state or from the capitalist media companies. And that's why it's exciting. It fits into that way of thinking.